happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Now we will do questions from the media. It's one question, one follow-up. First up, we have Jennifer Pagliaro from the Star. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Good morning, Mayor. I wanted to ask you about the province's decision last week to
Merci, merci Perrin. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci Perrin pour cette introduction et pour votre leadership à titre de président et PDG de la Chambre de commerce du Canada. Je tiens à saluer tous les gens de partout au pays qui assistent à cet événement avec nous. Même si on n'est pas réunis en personne, c'est une bonne chose qu'on puisse participer ensemble à l'activité aujourd'hui. I've had the chance to speak to many of you before in chambers of commerce and boards of trade right across the country. And whether it was in Toronto in 2019 or in Vancouver in 2014, we could never have predicted the way this year would turn our lives upside down. What we did know then, and what we've been reminded of today, is that Canadian businesses have what it takes to succeed no matter what the world throws at you. After all, being a business owner is all about overcoming challenges, getting that first loan, reaching that first customer, making that first big deal. Now, more than ever, we need that innovative attitude. We need people like you who see a challenge and ask not just how to overcome it, but how to turn it into an opportunity. Il n'y a aucun doute que cette crise mondiale rend la vie très difficile pour les entrepreneurs, les travailleurs et l'industrie. Mais avec des gens comme vous qui font preuve d'initiative, je sais qu'on va pouvoir passer à travers. La semaine dernière, j'ai eu la chance de parler avec Paul et Carl de Chez Couleur Chocolat en Gaspésie. Comme pour bien d'autres, la pandémie pose de grandes difficultés à leur entreprise. Mais avec agilité, ils se sont adaptés à la situation, notamment en saisissant les opportunités inattendues qu'ont été l'augmentation du tourisme en Gaspésie et de l'appétit renouvelé pour les produits locaux. C'est cette envie de toujours s'améliorer et d'innover qui fait que les entreprises sont si importantes pour notre économie et nos communautés. Elles nous poussent à toujours mieux faire. Over the last few weeks, I've been speaking with small business owners everywhere, from Louisbourg, Nova Scotia to St. Jacobs, Ontario. They've told me some incredible stories about retooling to make PPE, moving their business online to keep serving their community, and going that extra mile for their employees. But they've also told me that they couldn't have done it alone. No one should face the pandemic of the century by themselves. Not workers, not families, not business owners. And that's why, right from day one, our government stepped up to help. Durant la première vague, on a instauré les mesures économiques les plus importantes de notre époque, des mesures qui ont aidé des millions de travailleurs et de propriétaires d'entreprises. Maintenant, on entre dans la deuxième vague. Et je sais que vous êtes préoccupés par ce qui vous attend. Mais une chose est certaine, on a été là pour vous durant la première vague et on va être là pour vous tout au long de la crise. Earlier this month, we announced that we would strengthen the major programs that have been a lifeline for so many businesses. The extended wage subsidy, covering up to 65% of eligible wages until December, will help keep workers on the payroll. The new Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy will go directly to businesses. And those who've had to close temporarily because of a local public health order will be eligible for an additional 25% support. That brings the total to 90% of rent covered for the hardest hit businesses. To help with other costs, we've expanded eligibility for the Canada Emergency Business Account while increasing the total amount to $60,000. I know that people need this support as soon as possible. So as of today, I'm happy to announce that businesses operating out of a personal banking account can now access CEBA loans. This was a promise our government made to small businesses, and today we can announce that it is available through the larger financial institutions. Over the coming days, smaller financial institutions will also be ready to accept applications. For the other measures, the rent and wage subsidy, will be tabling legislation soon. I hope parliamentarians will support the swift passage of this critical new help for small businesses. There's a reason that the plan we laid out in the throne speech includes working with you as a key pillar of our approach. There's a reason we committed to support job-creating businesses through this second wave and beyond. Businesses, especially small businesses, are the lifeblood of our communities and the backbone of our economy. So in addition to measures like expanding CEBA and extending the wage subsidy, we'll also improve the Business Credit Availability Program and introduce further support for industries that have been hardest hit. Cette pandémie est difficile pour tout le monde, mais elle est pire pour certains. On ne peut pas laisser cette crise faire régresser les progrès réalisés pour les femmes, autant à titre de travailleuses que d'entrepreneurs. C'est pourquoi nous investissons pour offrir du soutien aux entreprises dirigées par des femmes par le biais du Fonds d'aide et de relance régionale et nous accélérons la stratégie pour les femmes en entrepreneuriat. On ne pourra pas continuer d'aller de l'avant si l'élan des femmes est freiné. Dans les mois à venir, pour aider les entreprises à reprendre leurs activités et à rester actives, on doit réfléchir et agir comme une équipe. Il suffit de regarder ce qu'on peut accomplir ensemble en prenant l'exemple de l'application Alerte COVID. Plusieurs entreprises l'ont déjà mise en place en travaillant avec leurs employés. Il faut continuer d'aller dans cette direction. Après tout, la meilleure chose qu'on puisse faire pour l'économie, c'est de protéger la santé de la population. In the throne speech and in the announcements we've made since, our government has laid out an ambitious plan. The situation demands nothing less. But I know some people are asking how we'll make this all happen. I don't have to tell you that low interest rates mean we can afford this. I don't have to tell you that doing less would end up costing far more because it would mean a slower recovery and bigger deficits in the long run. We'll keep doing whatever it takes, as long as it takes, to bridge Canadians and Canada, as well as Canadian businesses, through this crisis. But this is not forever. Beyond the emergency, we'll need to build back better in a fiscally sustainable way. We came into this crisis with the best balance sheet and the strongest fiscal position of any of our peers, and because of the resilience of Canadian businesses and the significant action our government took early on, Canada's recovery has been faster and stronger than many of our allies. Just look at the numbers. 76% of jobs lost at the start of this pandemic have now been recovered. In September alone, almost 380,000 positions were added to the economy. We still have work to do, and this second wave is bringing new challenges, but we're on the right track. And together, I know that we will keep moving forward. The path ahead won't always be easy. There will be challenges, there will be tough days, and there's a tough winter ahead. But there will also be better times in our future. Il faut lutter sans relâche contre cette pandémie, et je sais que les gens comme vous sont à la hauteur. Ensemble, on va traverser cette crise. Et ensemble, on va bâtir un Canada plus fort et plus prospère pour tous. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Over the past few days, we've seen record cases of COVID-19 across the country, and it's a cause for concern. Behind each new number is a friend, a parent, a neighbor, or a senior. People's lives are at stake, and we all need to do our part. So follow your local public health guidelines, wear a mask and keep a safe 2-meter distance from one another, and download the COVID Alert app. It's easy, it's free, and with over 4.8 million downloads, it'll help you do your part to protect your friends and loved ones. Together, we will get through this. Au cours des derniers jours, nous avons enregistré des nombres records de cas de COVID-19 un peu partout au pays. La situation est inquiétante et il faut la prendre au sérieux. Chaque nouveau cas, ce n'est pas seulement un chiffre ou une statistique, c'est un ami, un membre de notre famille, un voisin ou une personne âgée. Quand la vie des gens est en jeu, il est important de tous faire notre part. Continuer de suivre les directives locales de santé publique, porter un masque, respecter la distance sécuritaire de 2 mètres et télécharger l'application gratuite Alerte COVID. Since the pandemic started, many folks have found themselves working from home. And in cases where they've needed to self-isolate, most Canadians have been able to do so because they have a roof over their heads. But imagine if you didn't have a home, especially during a Canadian winter. Sadly, that's the reality for far too many Canadians, and our government is taking action to change that. Since 2015, we've created a national strategy to make housing a priority, with thousands of units constructed and provided affordable housing for over 1 million people. We took this issue seriously since forming government, and now that the pandemic has made housing needs more acute, we're stepping up again. Last month, Minister Hussen announced an investment of $1 billion for the new Rapid Housing Initiative. The goal of the program is to give the most vulnerable a safe place to live by quickly creating up to 3,000 new affordable housing units. Today, I can share more details about how this funding will be used. The Rapid Housing Initiative will be equally split between the major cities stream and the projects stream. Right now, our largest cities face a growing need for safe and affordable housing. We're investing $500 million for immediate support to build long-term housing for municipalities that have the highest demand. We've also opened up applications for the second half of funding through the projects stream. Today's announcement is part of our commitment to eliminate chronic homelessness in Canada, as we announced in the throne speech, while also creating good jobs in the housing and construction sectors. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce que notre plan d'1 milliard de dollars pour soutenir les Canadiens vulnérables dans le cadre de l'initiative pour la création rapide de logements sera divisé en 2 volets, le volet Grande Ville et le volet Projet. En ce moment, nos plus grandes villes font face à une demande croissante pour des logements sûrs et abordables. Nous investissons donc 500 millions de dollars dans l'aide immédiate à la construction de logements à long terme pour les municipalités où la demande est la plus forte. La deuxième moitié du montant ira pour le volet projet, qui acceptera des demandes pour les municipalités, les provinces et les territoires, ainsi que pour les organisations sans but lucratif et les corps dirigeants autochtones. L'annonce d'aujourd'hui s'inscrit dans notre engagement à éliminer l'itinérance chronique au Canada, comme nous l'avons annoncé dans le discours du trône, tout en créant de bons emplois dans les secteurs du logement et de la construction. Canada is now in the second wave of this pandemic. That comes with new challenges for small business owners, and as I told the Canadian Chamber of Commerce yesterday, we're stepping up to help, as we have since day one. Earlier this month, we announced that we would strengthen the programs that have been a lifeline for small businesses by introducing an extended wage subsidy, which covers up to 65% of eligible wages. Business owners like Steve and Cami of Steve's Poke Bar in BC will be able to keep their employees on the payroll. For support on rent, the new Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy will go directly to businesses, not to landlords. And those who have to close temporarily because of a local public health order will be eligible for an additional 25% support. That brings the total of 90% of rent covered for the hardest hit businesses. And to help cover other costs, we've expanded the eligibility for the Canada Emergency Business Account while increasing the total amount to $60,000. Depuis hier, les entreprises qui exercent leurs activités à partir de comptes bancaires personnels ont maintenant accès aux prêts accordés dans le cadre du compte d'urgence pour entreprises canadiennes en ouvrant un compte commercial auprès d'une institution financière participante. En ce qui concerne les autres mesures, comme la subvention salariale et la subvention pour le loyer, on va déposer un projet de loi sous peu. J'espère que tous les députés de la Chambre des communes se joindront à nous pour adopter cette mesure d'aide cruciale pour les entreprises canadiennes. I'd like to end this morning by taking a moment to recognize all of the women and men across the country who keep Canadians fed. Our government is here to support them just like we have been since the start of the pandemic. Today, Minister Bibeau will outline how people in BC can apply for the Emergency On-Farm Support Fund. People in other provinces will also be able to apply soon. Le fonds d'urgence pour les mesures de soutien à la ferme de 35 millions de dollars est déployé province par province pour aider les exploitants agricoles et assurer la santé et la sécurité des travailleurs agricoles d'ensemble du pays. La ministre Bibeau va en parler plus longuement plus tard aujourd'hui, mais on va continuer de faire notre part afin de soutenir les gens qui travaillent fort pour nous permettre de nourrir nos familles.
Set. Well, good morning. City Council, as you know, begins its October meeting today, and I will be focusing during the course of that meeting on the entire agenda, but on two items in particular that I want to discuss today that have been designated as my key items. The first key item is the approval of the City Manager's report on recovery and rebuilding a renewed Toronto. And this was a report that was written in expectation that the pandemic would go on for some period of time, but that we needed to have a plan to deal with the aftermath and to make sure the city could come back stronger than ever. The report going to council today outlines the city manager's recommendations to best position Toronto for recovery from COVID-19 and its very profound health, economic, equity, social, and financial impacts on the city. This is our roadmap to build the city up in the wake of the pandemic. We know that COVID-19 will remain a threat to us as it is today and in the immediate future. So this will also guide us as to how we can continue to reopen safely. In the short term, I have begun a priority push to have in hand safe, doors open safely scenarios so that we can all consider those scenarios for implementation when the modified stage 2 period comes to an end. Developed by Toronto Public Health, these scenarios would be meant to see restaurants and businesses reopen safely and stay open safely, much as we've tried to do with schools with, I think, considerable success to date. But once we've hopefully achieved that greater measure of stability, there will be a need for longer-term rebuilding and renewal. And for the downtown, for business generally, and for our social fabric, these have all been strained by the pandemic, and we will need longer-term plans to deal with them. That's where this plan comes in with its correct and crucial initial focus on the fact, not the opinion, but on the fact that this recovery and renewal must be a team effort, starting with all three governments, not limited to all three governments, because we will need to involve the nonprofit sector, business, and so on, but it has to start with a commitment from all three governments to rebuild and to renew and to implement a plan in the aftermath of the pandemic. Toronto simply cannot do these things alone. My second key item will be on winter patios. I am determined to make sure that we do everything we can as a city government in the short term to help restaurants who are willing and able to set up winter patios. And I recognize no single thing we have done or will do for the restaurant business is that kind of magic solution that gets them back on their feet. But we're trying to do everything that we can. And for those who are in a position to take advantage of the winter patio option, we want to make sure that we're not in the way. The recommendations that are going to council today will ensure that the city allows 4 winter patios on our sidewalks and other spaces and extends many of the planning permissions that were put in place to facilitate patios earlier this year. This is the right thing to do as part of a program to try and assist these businesses to get back on their feet. We know that winter is coming, and we know that we need to support winter patios where they're applicable as much as we possibly can. So we're giving businesses the flexibility to operate where it is safe and where it is possible during the winter months. Safe, of course, when I make reference to operating safely, must include compliance with ventilation requirements that are set out in the provincial regulation. And to the extent that clarification is required on that for restaurant operators, I hope we will have it today, because I think it is fair for them as they make investment decisions, both for them to check themselves as to the wording of the provincial regulation, but also to seek clarification before making investment decisions. As I've said many times in discussing this, the purpose of our trying to step to one side to allow greater flexibility for these patios was not meant to say somehow that it was just okay to create indoor space by another name through things like, say, hermetically sealed tents. While we also have some limitations with respect to patios in curb lanes and ensuring that we can safely clear our roads from the snow, there are opportunities to allow us to continue the success of patios through the winter in areas such as sidewalks and private property, including parking lots. And so it is my hope that following this meeting, our officials will be communicating these changes to the restaurant industry so that they have a clear understanding of what is allowed and what is encouraged. I have also been in direct contact as recently as yesterday with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, and continue to put forward suggestions from the restaurant industry with respect to ways in which the programs the federal government came forward with, which were very responsive, are as responsive as they can be to the direct concerns expressed to me in summit meetings that I've been having with the hospitality industry to understand their concerns and make sure to the maximum extent possible I assist them in seeing those addressed. But that really is a big part of the thrust behind seeking these open safely scenarios from the medical officer of health so that we can get these businesses open again and hopefully keep them open once the period of stage 2, modified stage 2, has elapsed. Those are just 2 of the items on the council agenda. There are more than 100 items up for discussion in total, including moving forward with our freight and goods movement strategy, which helps to better manage deliveries in the city, which is important to a lot of people, both in business and people trying to get around. Approving the interim shelter recovery and infrastructure implementation plan to shift to a greater focus on supportive housing. Creating new supportive housing opportunities in Parkdale in partnership with the University Health Network and the United Way of Greater Toronto, and continuing the implementation of the Tenants First report to transform Toronto community housing to help Toronto community housing residents, including the creation of a separate standalone seniors housing unit so that we can better serve and in more an intensive way serve some of our elderly residents in TCHC. I think it is important for people to know that we are focused on responding to the continuing COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, spending a huge amount of our time, a great amount of my own personal time, but that at the same time, the business of the city, the business of growing and building and servicing the city goes on, and that we will be making plans and doing things to help the city residents live in a better place long after the pandemic is over. I'm now happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Now we will do questions from the media. It's 1 question, 1 follow-up. First up, we have Jennifer Pagliaro from the Star. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Good morning, Mayor. I wanted to ask you about the province's decision last week to overrule planning in the West Don lands. That includes a site that's up at council, or was supposed to be up at council today. I'm not clear what's going to happen now. That includes open door incentives. And I wanted to know whether what the province did is how you imagine partnering with the province on provincial land to build affordable housing with city money.
Well, first of all, we do have to acknowledge it's their land, which is a factor in all of this. You know, the fact that there may end up, and hopefully will, we certainly will be very determined to see lots of affordable housing on those lands is also something that, you know, will in the end be a plus for the city. However, the ministerial zoning order, let's be clear about that. It is a device, I believe, that was put there in the provincial legislation to be used on a fairly selective basis, a very selective basis, and most often either at the request of the city or certainly in partnership with the city. And so there are instances I can say, for example, with respect to some of our supportive housing initiatives where we've asked for a ministerial zoning order. But I think the practice should be and should revert to being what I think it largely has been in the past, which is that it basically only happens when the municipality either asks for it to try and expedite something, or when it is done in very close consultation and partnership with the city to achieve some objective that I think most people would agree upon. And so I hope we can sort of have a look at this with the minister and go back to a day, notwithstanding some of the benefits that could flow from these particular decisions, go back to a day where this was selectively used and used, you know, almost every time, either at the request of the city or in very close consultation with the city. Because in the end, the city should have, you know, the domain over its own planning decisions within our boundaries.
You know, is this not another example, Mayor, of the Premier sort of acting like he's in your role? You know, I was told by one of your council colleagues that city planning actually discovered this by accident. It sounds like they didn't even bother to tell anyone that they had done this.
Well, you know, I think it is less than ideal to have it happen in this circumstance, where, as I understand it, it may well be somebody discovered it, but I think we heard about it literally on the eve of when it was actually happening. And it wasn't a call to say, what do you think about this? Or, you know, what is your thought? But rather to say it's happening. And I think that is a less than ideal situation, to say the least. And I don't think it's an example of any particular behavior on the part of the Premier. As I've said many times, he's been a good partner to Toronto, you know, the vast majority of the time, on certainly on COVID-19 with an exception, and on many other matters as well. However, I think when you have a tool, a legislative tool like this that is so powerful and that can so easily override, you know, even just the consultative process, let alone the decision-making process of important developments in the city, it should be used very sparingly. It should never be used where the city learns about it in the dark of night, you know, the night before it happens. I think we have some discussion to be held on that with the province, so that we can make sure we can, you know, have this happen in the way it's happened during COVID-19. Close consultation, lots of discussion back and forth, sorting things out, usually where we have some kind of an agreement between ourselves, as opposed to things being imposed on us. I just believe the City of Toronto is too important in the context of the size and scale of the planning decisions we have to make here, and many other kinds of decisions, that our government is too accountable, has its own degree of expertise about what's good for it, and that it is not appropriate in 2020 to have those kinds of things, you know, routinely overridden by the wishes of the province on this and many other matters. And so I think we should have some discussion to try to, you know, find a better way.
Thanks, Jennifer. Next up, we have Lucas Meyer from 1010. Go ahead, Lucas.
Thank you very much. Sort of on the same wavelength that Jennifer was asking about. Excuse me, Mayor. The ranked ballots motion. You know, obviously with the government's bill last week, that's obviously they made a move on ranked ballots. Are you encouraged by the fact that several PC MPPs, you know, wrote to the medical officer of health, you know, expressing their concern about stage 2? Does this in any way give you any hope that, you know, if there's enough political pressure from your side on the ranked ballots issue, that could potentially be reversed?
Well, what disappointed me about this was it was a solution in search of a problem. You know, I didn't hear anybody saying this was a grave problem. It was already in effect in one city, and I think it had been carried out relatively successfully there in a previous election. We were on track to do it in 2026, and we're going to make very careful plans to make sure it was done well, and that's why it was a bit delayed. And again, I think it should be left within the purview of especially sophisticated municipalities like ours, but I can't distinguish between us and smaller cities. I think we should be left to decide how people are going to get elected in our municipalities. And in our case, I was a supporter, and I am a supporter of ranked ballots, because I believe it will help to diversify our council, which is something that we need to do, and to encourage new people to enter politics. And I think just as importantly as both of those, I would say it's going to increase the civility of politics. And I think you all know how much I believe that it is so important to maintaining public confidence and to getting good decisions made that we have kind of a civilized discourse. And I think ranked ballot elections encourage that. So, I hope that our motion and other pressure that may come upon the government will cause them to, revisit this, just in the sense that I think the reason given as to why they had to do it, which was something to do with expense and hassle during a pandemic, didn't really hold very much water, to be frank. We'll see what happens. I believe it still would be a step forward to let municipalities make their own decisions on this, and a step forward for those who did it, which would have included, I think, Toronto, to actually be in a position to do so.
But are you encouraged, based on what we saw with the letter from Ms. McKenna and Mr. Gill, that there seems to be some willingness when there is enough political pressure? I mean, that they could reverse the decision. I mean, there's been times when council has pushed back on provincial moves and nothing's happened.
To be candid, I think this matter is so little understood by the public that you'll be hard pressed to get, any kind of, big public momentum behind this, because it's an obscure topic in the sense that I think most people, understand how elections work because they've always worked the way they do now. But I think the notion of some other way of operating elections is not something people have spent a lot of time on. And, so I think in that sense, the opportunities to get the government to change its mind are limited, but not zero. So, because if I thought they were zero, then, why would we bother spending the time passing this motion? I hope they might think about this again, because as I say, it was a solution in search of a problem. But am I sort of thinking that they're going to, in the next 5 days, say, we've reconsidered and we're going to change our mind on this? I wouldn't expect that, but there's always hope.
Thank you, Lucas. Next up, we have Matt Bingley from Global. Go ahead, Matt.
Good morning, Mayor. In the recovery plan, the city manager said that it could not be, the recovery could not be made on the backs of taxpayers, but he also did say that the city can't keep going back to other levels of government looking for money. So there will have to be, the other shoe will drop at some point. So I'm just wondering if you could say when a tax increase may be appropriate to help with the city's recovery.
Well, first of all, I think what the city manager was saying with respect to approaching the other governments for money is that we can't keep going back on kind of an episodic basis. Every single quarter, every single year, you're going back with some new need that you have because the existing financial arrangements as between the different governments affecting cities are not adequate, which they aren't. I mean, they're archaic. They are based on an 1867 constitutional arrangement about cities, and it was never contemplated, I'm sure, at that time, a city, say, the size of Toronto, 3 million people, bigger than most provinces in this country. So I think that's really what it's saying, is we've got to come up with a better regime. And I don't think the city manager mentions this, but I think he would agree with me that we don't want to open up the Constitution. That's not the way to go about this. So we have to come up with some practical arrangements that, first and foremost, start with, existing revenues that are taken in by the other governments and having those more fairly applied to the cities where a lot of the delivery of services rest. With respect to the matter of tax increases within the city, I've said repeatedly, and this is not the day to be deciding upon the budget. I've been spending a huge amount of time with the city officials on the 2021 budget. There are problems there, but that we're going at it from the standpoint that neither can we afford to cut services, nor can we afford to see people faced with substantial property tax increases, because both would be counterproductive to the very difficult situation people find themselves in right now. And so we're trying to fashion other answers, including continued help, for example, from the other governments with the year 2021, which is just as much a pandemic recovery year as this year was. And we're talking to them about that very actively right now.
And just to shift, Councillor Michael Ford's motion on capping fees for delivery services, you mentioned that you spoke to the Premier the other day. Did this come up, and did he signal his willingness to participate?
No, I didn't ask him the direct question, will you do this? Because we can't, but we certainly, it was raised in discussion. He knows it's a concern of mine, and I think it's a concern he shares. I think he said so publicly at one of his own media avails. I had a chance to talk to one of these companies yesterday, and they told me of some of the very good things they're doing to help introduce new products to make it better for restaurants. But the fact remains, their main product line, which is their straightforward delivery service, extracts a 30% commission from restaurants. And the restaurants have told me very clearly that a 30% commission taken off the top for a meal that somebody's ordering leaves them with very little, at least not enough to sort of, be a big help to keep them in business. And so my point of view expressed to this company and expressed generally here today, again, would be that these companies, as a matter of good corporate citizenship, but also as a matter of just good business, should be doing something to help their customers, at least in the short term while there are shutdowns going on, and perhaps beyond that during some of the additional period of the pandemic. But that's a discussion I've been having. This is not the first time I've talked to them. I talked to them as far back as April about this, and they seem to be, relatively unyielding in saying that that's something that they can't or won't do.
Okay, that's it for today, everybody. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks a lot.
While much of the world stays home, Canada's fertilizer industry keeps working to ensure the food we depend on grows better and stronger. Because without fertilizer, harvests would be cut in half. The nutrients in soil must be replenished for the next harvest. To recover from this crisis, the world depends on us. We secure tomorrow's food by fertilizing crops today. To keep things growing, you can count on us. To learn more, visit us at fertilizercanada.ca/COVID-19.
A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. So, he loses touch with reality and lives